This week, my priority has been work on the old well and making it safe and secure so that I can start to implement my future plans for the front of the house. But I wasn't sure exactly how much help I would be having with this work, and therefore how long the work might actually take me. But I did know that I would be doing a fair amount of work, the like of which I've not really done before. The weather forecast for the week was good, and although it was sunny when I arrived early on the first day, it was still pretty fresh. First, I headed upstairs for my regular checks, which I will be talking about next week. Then I was back down to open up the house and check the work from last week. Which I thought was looking pretty good in the brighter light. Then I was outside for work relating to the well. First, moving some of the brick boards that were delivered last week. In Spanish, these are called machiembrado, which I think means tongue and groove, and they are what the builders used in their ceiling work earlier in the year. All my work on the first day was to be prepped for bigger work the next day, and I'll explain the overall plans for it in a bit more detail later on. First up, I wanted to recheck the current levels around the well edge. And then I wanted to measure and mark up some of the key lines for the work. The plan for this area, which I talked about in an earlier video, is for a terrace stretching from the front of the house to the shed behind, all at about 50 centimeters above the current level. And the plan is for the well to be totally covered and to be beneath the terrace. Although the well is dry, I would have liked to use the cavity, but that was going to be too complicated and expensive at this stage with my plans for the terrace. To help explain the work that I'm doing, I thought it'd be useful to bring you up here to the office and talk you through a few basic drawings of the well as it is now and the work that I intend to do. Starting with a very basic picture of what you can see on the surface at the moment, which is a square hole of about 90 centimeters across that has a 30 centimeter stone wall around its edge, and which I've slowly been taking down over the last few months and more recently with Rex. But beneath the surface, the actual well cavity is circular and has a diameter of about 1.60 meters. And between the cavity and the structure on top are 4 brick arches that act like a vault and hold the well top in place. And I've been trying to avoid making any changes to this part of the structure to avoid any unnecessary destabilization. And the key goal for the work is to put a strong and secure top on the well, which needs to be much wider than both the larger circular cavity and the smaller square hole above. And the initial strength of the cover will be provided by 4 reinforced concrete beams of 2.80 meters that will rest on level ground at the lowest possible level without touching the brick arches beneath the surface. And then on top of these beams will be the brick boards that I moved earlier this morning, and they will provide a solid cover across the whole cavity, which I will then be placing a rebar mesh on top of, held up by some small brick pieces. that will help to reinforce the concrete that I will then be pouring on top, that will provide the rigidity and strength to the cover. So the well cover will essentially be 3 levels: the beams, the brickboard plates, and then the thick concrete on top, all of which will be covered by further material when the terrace surface is done, so none of the well cover will actually be visible in the future. So I hope that gives you a good idea of the plans and will help you make sense of the prep work that I'm heading back to now, which for the rest of the morning involve levelling the ground around the well and lowering it to the level of these concrete tiles, which I want to avoid having to break up. This was a quick check of how high the beams will be using a brick with the same 20 centimetre height. After lunch, I was back to the levelling work, which at this end involves removing a combination of stones and soil from behind, and then the stones from the top of the wall around the edge. After a bit of a tidy up, I was back checking how level the edges now were, and I needed to clear a few more stones to make the surface smoother. When I had the area roughly level, I planned to use a layer of sand to ensure the beams would rest level. Then it was time for a final tidy up before work the next day, where I would be getting help from Rex and one of the building team who worked here before. And the final prep for the day involved topping up the water store and cutting the rebar mesh. Day 2 was going to be a big day, and I arrived early to get things set up. Including dropping off some gravel in case more was needed for the concrete work later on. Rex arrived on site with a friend of his who was staying with him called Ray, but who would only be watching, and he had also kindly picked up Fodo, the builder, en route. And after an initial brief on the plans, we got into the work, which I hope will be reasonably easy to understand after my explanations. A couple of extra steps we added were filling in the space between the beams with some stones, and adding some mortar to the beam tops to help the brick boards be level. After the rebar was in place, we added some formwork boards to all the sides, which in the case of the ends and the edge on the house side was more as a precaution. And after getting enough rocks and weights in place, it was concrete time, with Photo taking responsibility for the mixing and shifting, and Rex and I working on the pouring and levelling.
Okay. So there you go. You can put one.
Rex had kindly stayed longer than planned, and after the last concrete load, he and Ray headed off. So Photo and I worked on compacting and smoothing the concrete. Then it was time for a clean-up, and then a late lunch break for me, being entertained by Photo and a couple of funny stories.
I smoke so much sleep, so that I can sleep well. you know, if you smoke, sometimes if you sleep,
And then after some final tidying and checks, we headed out so that I could drop Photo back at his home. The next day I arrived early, checked the concrete and opened up. And then wetted the concrete, which looked to be setting okay. My next task was going to be to clear away the form boards, but I took the opportunities to fill up the water butt and deposit while I was doing it. I was going to be away on Friday, so I was only going to have 3 and a bit days for working, And as I hadn't been sure how long the well cover work would take, I hadn't planned any other major work that I might not be able to finish. But one task that I did want to do related indirectly to my plans to empty the shed, and it would require a lot of strimming and clearing of vegetation on the next terrace down and the slope above it, which will become a little bit clearer later on. On the last morning of the week, I started with 2 checks outside. Before heading in and getting ready for some work. First, wetting the concrete. And then cutting some rebar that I wanted to use later on. when I wanted to do some work on part of the slope that I trimmed the day before. Well, as you can see, it's not the easiest to get to that tent, which is part of the reason for having it down there. But rather than have to walk all the way down the path and then along the terrace, I would quite like to be able to go up and down the slope. And if I went straight down, it's just too steep. But if I take it on a diagonal, it's just about okay. And so rather than trying to put steps in there, I am going to try and use some of these old beams to provide at least a little bit of solidity along the path that I'm intending. This is definitely an experiment and a very short-term measure, but it'd be a good use of some of this old wood, and if it works, it will save me quite a lot of time and effort walking around on the path. Well, they're not perfect, but at least it's a lot easier to get up and down. I've still got to put some more bars in, about 5 or 6 of them, and I've got a bit more tidying up to do, but I'm out of time for today, so that's it. And as I won't be here tomorrow, that's it for my work for this week, for which the big focus has been the work on the well, with the beams, the bricks, and then the concrete on top, and which went faster than I expected and with reasonably good results. I then worked on clearing the slope down, the terrace below, and the slope back up, which all relate indirectly to my plans for clearing out the contents of the shed, which is something that I'm going to be looking to get on with next week. when I will also get on to doing a few other things. And in next week's video, I will give an update on the daily check or experiment that I've been doing upstairs. And I'll also be answering some of the questions that seem to be recurring in the comments after my videos. But if you do have any particular questions, please add them to the comments below this video, and I'll do my best to answer as many of them in next week's video. So please do tune in to hear the answers.